The moment my brother-in-law leaned toward the microphone and called me the help, someone laughed so hard they spilled red wine onto the white carpet. I remember noticing the stains spreading slowly, darker at the edges, while no one corrected him. My daughter stared at her shoes. I stood there holding a coat that wasn't mine, listening to the applause fade. What none of them knew, what I had only just realized myself, was that every assumption holding that room together was already wrong. The moment my brother-in-law leaned toward the microphone and called me the help, someone laughed so hard they spilled red wine onto the white carpet. I remember the stain spreading slowly, darker at the edges, while the room decided to pretend the joke was charming. The band had just finished a smooth jazz cover of an old Motown song, and the last note was still hanging in the air when he said it, like he was adding the punchline to a story everyone already agreed on. I stood near the back of the ballroom with a coat draped over my forearm, a man's coat, heavy wool, still warm from whoever had been wearing it. It wasn't mine. I didn't even know how it ended up in my hands. I just knew that in the photo my daughter would probably post later, I'd look like I was holding someone's burdens politely. This wasn't some casual dinner where people get loose and say stupid things. This was a foundation gala, 150 donors in tuxedos and gowns, crystal glasses on linen tablecloths, waiters moving like they'd been trained to glide instead of walk. The event was held at the old Drayton Hotel downtown in Charleston, the kind of place with gold-framed mirrors and marble floors that make everyone speak half a tone softer. My daughter, Paige, was being honored tonight. She'd just been appointed the youngest regional director in the state for a nonprofit that placed foster kids with long-term families. She'd worked herself raw for years to earn it, and I was proud in that quiet, chest-tight way that doesn't need to be announced. I'd made sure I was early. I always arrive early. It gives me a few minutes to breathe before I have to be mom in public, before I have to smile and answer questions from people who think they know my daughter because they've seen her name in newsletters. I'd chosen a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, something that wouldn't draw attention. Paige had insisted I come, even though I'd offered to stay home and let her enjoy the night without worrying about me. She'd said, "I want you there," like it was non-negotiable. I didn't ask too many questions about who else would be there. I already knew enough. Her husband's family would be there, and when the Whitlocks showed up somewhere, the room adjusted itself around them. My brother-in-law, Grant Whitlock, was the one at the microphone. Technically, he wasn't my brother-in-law by blood. He was my son-in-law's older brother, a man who treated titles like oxygen. He was tall and clean-cut, the kind of attractive that reads as trustworthy to strangers. He wore confidence like it was tailored. Grant owned a construction company that won city contracts, and he had a way of speaking that made people lean in, even when he was saying nothing worth hearing. He lifted his glass and smiled toward the head table, where Paige sat beside my son-in-law, Mason. Mason's tux fit perfectly, his hair slicked back, his posture careful. He looked like a man trying to disappear inside his own life. Paige looked radiant and tense. I could tell by the way her fingers kept smoothing an invisible wrinkle in her lap. She'd never been comfortable with attention, not even the good kind. Grant said, "Let's hear it for Paige, doing God's work and all that." And the room laughed softly, the polite laugh people give because the speaker is important. Then he tilted his chin in my direction, toward the back of the room, where I had been standing out of everyone's way, and he said, "And a special thanks to the help tonight." Paige's mother made sure everything looked respectable. That's what she does. The words landed like something dropped in a quiet church. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong in a way that made the air feel different. People laughed again, this time louder, because Grant's tone suggested everyone should. The laugh wasn't cruel on purpose. That was the worst part. It was casual, easy, like my humiliation was a harmless garnish on the night. I looked at Paige. My first instinct was always to look at Paige. She didn't lift her head. Her eyes stayed on her shoes, like if she stared hard enough, the moment would slide past. Mason's jaw tightened, and I watched him swallow. He didn't turn to look at me. He didn't say a word. He sat there like the chair had straps. My hands went cold around the coat. The wool felt too thick suddenly, like it was pulling heat out of my skin. Somewhere to my left, a waiter paused with a tray, then kept moving. The band started playing again, a few notes to fill the gap, and the room relaxed because it had permission to. Grant kept talking, as if he hadn't just labeled me. Some people just know their place, he said, chuckling, and a few men near the bar nodded like they understood the humor. Now, Paige, he continued, we're all proud of you. The Whitlocks take care of their own. We take care of family. Family. The word made something in my stomach twist. I'd been taking care of family for a long time. I'd been doing it since Paige was 6, and her father decided he preferred a different life in a different state with a different woman, leaving behind a stack of unpaid bills and a child who asked me every night what she'd done wrong. I'd taken care of family when Paige needed braces, and my car needed a new transmission, and I chose her teeth. I'd taken care of family when she got accepted to college, and I worked weekends to cover the gap that scholarships didn't touch. I'd taken care of family when she married Mason, and his parents made a point of saying how nice it was that Paige came from humble stock, like it was a compliment. And I'd taken care of family quietly, because quiet was how I survived. Loud people didn't survive where I grew up. Loud people got noticed people got cut down. But standing there in that ballroom, I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. Quiet wasn't what they saw as strength. Quiet was what they saw as permission. Grant finished his toast, and applause rolled through the room. The sound hit my ears like static. I felt myself breathing, slow and even, because my body has always understood that composure is a kind of armor. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't leave. I just stood there holding a coat that wasn't mine, watching the stain on the carpet settle into the fibers like it belonged there. A woman near the front turned her head and looked at me with the kind of amused pity people reserve for someone they've already categorized. She didn't know me. She didn't know anything about me, but she knew the story Grant had just told, and in that room, stories became truth faster than facts. I could hear little fragments of conversations starting back up. Did you hear that? Oh, Grant, he's such a character. That family is something else. Someone said my daughter's name with a laugh. Like Paige was lucky to be absorbed into a world where people could joke like that. I wanted to walk up to the microphone and correct him. I wanted to say, calmly, that I wasn't the help. I was the reason Paige had made it to this moment at all. I wanted to look at Mason and ask him if he was proud of himself for staying silent. I wanted to ask Paige if she knew she was shrinking in front of a room full of strangers just to keep the peace with people who would never offer her peace in return. But I didn't do any of that, because the truth was, I wasn't surprised. Grant had been needling me for months. Little remarks that sounded innocent if you didn't listen too closely. Do you still do your own grocery shopping? Paige says you're so handy like a real worker. Must be nice to have someone like you around. You people know how to hustle. He'd said those things with a smile, and everyone else had smiled back, and Paige had always squeezed my hand later and whispered, he's just like that. Like that was an explanation instead of an excuse. Tonight he'd finally said it in public. Tonight he'd made it official. I watched Paige's shoulders rise and fall with a controlled breath. I watched her force a smile when someone at her table leaned in and said something. I watched my daughter perform gratitude while her own body begged her to disappear, and I felt a slow, heavy disappointment settle in me. Not just toward Grant, but toward the story Paige had decided she needed to live inside. A waiter approached me and asked if I needed anything. His eyes flicked to the coat on my arm, then back to my face, the way people do when they're trying to place you. I said, no, thank you, and he moved on, relieved. Grant stepped away from the microphone and took congratulations like he'd done something generous. He walked past me on his way toward the bar. As he passed, he leaned in close enough that only I could hear him, his voice low and pleasant. Don't take it personally, he said. You know how it is. Paige's crowd now, different standards. Then he straightened and walked on, already laughing with someone else, already letting the moment become my problem to carry. I stood still for another beat, feeling the weight of that sentence. Different standards. As if dignity was something you earned by proximity to wealth. As if respect was a club with a cover charge. I didn't look at Paige again. Not because I didn't love her. Because I did. I loved her enough that I knew if I looked at her, I might break. And I couldn't afford to break in that room. Not yet. So I turned slightly and started walking toward the hallway outside the ballroom, the quieter corridor where the old photographs hung, black and white shots of Charleston, when it still pretended it was gentler than it was. My heels didn't make much sound on the carpet. The coat slid a little on my forearm, and I adjusted it automatically. Habit. Fix what's slipping. Hold what's falling. Behind me, the gala continued. Paige smiled. Grant drank. Mason kept his eyes on the table, and the room settled back into its rhythm, convinced the moment was over. It wasn't over. Not for me. Because as I reached the hallway, I saw the event coordinator speaking urgently into her headset, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the ballroom like she was trying to decide whether to interrupt something important. And when she saw me, her expression changed, confusion first, then recognition, then something like alarm. She stepped toward me, hesitated, then said softly, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you were, I didn't know you were the one they were waiting for." I stared at her for a long second, and for the first time that night, I felt the floor shift under everything I thought I understood. I asked, very calmly, "Waiting for me to do what?" She swallowed. "To sign the authorization. It is day." And in that moment, holding a coat that wasn't mine in a hallway full of old photographs, I realized the life my daughter believed she had married into was built on something far more fragile than pride. The coordinator's words followed me even after she apologized again and stepped away, her heels clicking too fast down the hallway as if she'd said something dangerous. Waiting for me to sign the authorization. The phrase echoed, hollow and unfinished. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't stop her. I just stood there for a moment longer than was comfortable, then continued walking until I found a small seating alcove near the restrooms, the kind of place hotels build so people can pretend they're not waiting for something. I sat down and placed the coat across my lap. It smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. Mason's brother-in-law, I realized. Grant's coat. He must have handed it to me earlier without thinking, or maybe without caring, assuming I'd hold it the way people like me always held things for people like him. I almost laughed at that, but the feeling never made it past my chest. From where I sat, I could still hear the muffled sounds of the gala through the closed doors. Applause rose and fell. Glasses clinked. A woman's laugh cut through everything else, sharp and bright. The night was moving on without me, rewriting itself in real time. That's how these things always go. The moment that matters most to you becomes a footnote to everyone else. I thought about how I must have looked to them. A middle-aged woman in a plain dress, standing at the back of the room, not speaking unless spoken to. Paige's mother. That was the only role anyone in that ballroom knew me by, and I'd made sure it stayed that way. I'd worked hard to keep my life compartmentalized, clean lines between what I did and who I was allowed to be around my daughter. It had seemed respectful. It had seemed safe. It hadn't occurred to me that my silence had given other people room to invent me. I'd arrived alone, driven myself, parked in the far lot because valet always feels like a small performance I never asked to be part of. I hadn't introduced myself to anyone important. I hadn't corrected Mason's aunt when she assumed I helped out with Paige's event planning. I hadn't said a word when Grant asked, with a smile too wide to be kind, whether I was still doing that little office thing. That little office thing. I thought about the words now and felt something in me harden, not into anger, but into clarity. I'd learned early that people rarely ask questions when they think they already know the answers. Let them assume. Let them underestimate. It keeps things simpler. That rule had served me well for decades. It had protected my daughter from questions she didn't need to answer, from comparisons she didn't ask for. It had protected me from having to explain myself to people who wouldn't listen anyway. But sitting there, holding Grant's coat like a prop in someone else's story. I understood the cost of that rule more clearly than I ever had before. A woman I didn't recognize stepped into the alcove, glanced at me, then looked away quickly, embarrassed to be seen seeing me. She checked her phone, sighed, and left again. I was invisible and exposed at the same time, and the combination made my skin prickle. I replayed Grant's words in my head, not because I wanted to punish myself, but because I wanted to understand them. The help. It wasn't just an insult. It was a classification, a way of placing me where he believed I belonged so the rest of the room could stay comfortable. If I was the help, then the laughter was justified. If I was the help, then Paige's silence made sense. If I was the help, then no one had to examine their own behavior too closely. I thought about Paige again, about the way her shoulders had folded in on themselves at the table, about how quickly she'd learned to manage other people's egos. That hadn't started with Mason. That hadn't started with the Whitlocks. That had started years earlier, when she realized it was easier to smooth things over than to make waves, when she decided that success meant fitting into rooms like that one without asking who built them. I wondered how many times she'd watched someone diminish me and told herself it wasn't worth the fight. My phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't look at it right away. I knew who it would be, Paige or Mason or both. I let it buzz until it stopped, then took the phone out and placed it face down on the small table beside me. The screen lit up again a few seconds later, persistent. I turned it to silent. I wasn't ready to talk. Not because I was too emotional, but because I was too calm. I've learned to distrust that kind of calm. It's the stillness that comes right before a decision you can't undo. The coordinator's words surfaced again, sharper now. Authorization, waiting for me. There were only a few contexts where people waited for my authorization, and none of them involved gala dinners or nonprofit awards. Those authorizations lived in offices with bad coffee and fluorescent lights, in conference rooms where people spoke carefully and took notes. They involved permits, compliance reviews, and contracts that didn't get signed until certain conditions were met. I hadn't planned to deal with any of that tonight. I hadn't planned to deal with anything at all beyond clapping politely and telling Paige how proud I was. But plans have a way of dissolving when someone else decides to test you. I picked up the coat and stood. I didn't want to be sitting when someone else came looking for me. I wanted to be ready. Ready for what? I wasn't entirely sure yet. I just knew that something had shifted, and pretending otherwise would only delay the inevitable. As I walked back toward the ballroom doors, I caught my reflection in one of the mirrors lining the hallway. I looked exactly the way I always did. Hair neatly pinned, expression neutral, no visible cracks. If you didn't know me, you'd see nothing remarkable. And that, I realized, was the problem and the advantage all at once. The doors opened, and the noise rushed back in. The room looked different now, or maybe I did. I scanned the tables without thinking and found Paige immediately. She was laughing at something Mason said. Her head tilted just slightly, the way she did when she was trying to look relaxed. Mason's hand rested on her knee. Grant was at the bar, already holding a fresh drink, his back to me. No one noticed me re-enter the room. Not at first. I moved along the edge, keeping to the shadows cast by tall centerpieces and standing guests. I set the coat down on a chair near the bar, draping it carefully, the way I always did with things that didn't belong to me. Then I stepped back. A man near the bar turned and did a double take when he saw me. He was older, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that fit like it had been measured twice. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in concentration. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone running through mental files, trying to place a face where it belonged. He leaned toward the woman next to him and murmured something. She followed his gaze to me, then straightened, her smile freezing for half a second before returning. They both looked away too quickly. That was when I knew the coordinator hadn't misspoken. People began to notice me then, not as Paige's mother, not as the help, but as something undefined. Uncertainty rippled in small, almost invisible ways. Conversations paused. A man excused himself from a group and checked his phone. Another glanced toward the head table, then back at me. Grant finally turned, drink in hand, and his smile faltered when he saw where people were looking. He followed their gaze, and his eyes landed on me. For a brief, unguarded moment, confusion crossed his face. Not fear, not yet. Just the discomfort of realizing the room was paying attention to something he hadn't controlled. I met his eyes and gave him a small, polite nod. The kind you give a stranger you recognize but don't owe anything to. He frowned slightly, then shrugged it off and turned back to his conversation, already dismissing whatever unease had flickered through him. That was Grant's mistake. He believed every moment passed if you ignored it long enough. I didn't approach Paige. I didn't approach Mason. I didn't approach anyone. I stood where I was, letting the room do what rooms like that always do when something doesn't add up. It adjusted. It recalibrated. It waited. My phone buzzed again in my purse. This time, I checked it. A single message from Paige. "Mom, are you okay?" That was out of line. "I'm so sorry. We'll talk later. I promise." Later. The word felt thin. I typed back, "I'm fine. Enjoy your night. We'll talk soon." Then I put the phone away. Across the room, the coordinator reappeared near the edge of the dance floor, scanning faces. When she saw me, relief flashed across her expression, quickly replaced by something more careful. She started toward me, then stopped when Grant intercepted her, saying something I couldn't hear. She shook her head, gestured past him in my direction, and said something that made his posture stiffen. He looked at me again, really looked this time. I saw the calculation begin, slow and reluctant, and for the first time that evening, I understood exactly how far his assumptions were about to take him down the wrong path. Grant's smile tightened as the coordinator spoke to him, her hand lifting slightly in my direction. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I'd seen that exchange play out in other rooms, other buildings, other contexts where authority wasn't announced but felt. His shoulders shifted, just a fraction, as if he were adjusting to a draft that hadn't existed a moment before. He laughed, waved her off lightly, and said something that made her lips press into a thin line. She nodded once, sharply, and stepped around him without another word, heading straight for me. Grant watched her go, his expression caught between annoyance and curiosity. He took a sip of his drink and followed a few steps behind, careful not to look like he was following. "Ma'am," the coordinator said when she reached me, her voice low and professional. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been some confusion. We were told you'd already reviewed the materials." I looked at her calmly. "I haven't reviewed anything tonight." Her eyes flicked past me, then back. "Of course, that's fine. We can step somewhere quieter if you prefer." Grant cleared his throat behind her. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone friendly, practiced. "This is my family's event." The coordinator didn't look at him. "I understand," she said, still facing me. "We just need a moment." "Here's." Grant stepped closer, placing himself slightly between us, the way men do when they're used to rooms bending around them. "My sister-in-law's mother," he said with a chuckle, gesturing vaguely toward me, "is probably just enjoying the night. Whatever paperwork you're talking about can wait." The coordinator's gaze finally snapped to his. Something passed between them then, quick and sharp. Recognition, or at least the beginning of it. "Sir," she said evenly, "that's not accurate." "I have not." Grant blinked. "Excuse me?" She turned back to me, clearly choosing her words. "If now isn't a good time, we can reschedule. But the board is expecting confirmation before midnight." Board. The word landed cleanly. No embellishment. No apology. Grant's laughter died in his throat. "What board?" he asked, a little too quickly. I didn't answer him. I addressed the coordinator. "I'll step outside for a minute," I said. "I need some air." "Well, of course," she replied immediately, relief flickering again. "I'll let them know." Grant stared at me like he was seeing a different person wearing the same face. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice lower now, edged with irritation. "If there's some issue, you should come to me." I met his eyes. "There isn't an issue," I said. "Not yet." Then I turned and walked toward the terrace doors without waiting for a response. The night air hit my face like a reset. Charleston evenings are thick even when they're cool, heavy with salt and old brick and jasmine from somewhere you can never quite locate. I stepped out onto the terrace and leaned lightly against the railing, looking down at the street below. Cars passed, headlights streaking briefly through the gaps between buildings. Life was continuing at its usual pace, indifferent to whatever social recalibration was happening inside. A few seconds later, the terrace doors opened again. Footsteps approached, slower this time. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't need to. "Hey," Mason said quietly. I closed my eyes for just a second before facing him. He stood a few feet away, hands shoved into his pockets, his tuxedo jacket already unbuttoned like he was uncomfortable inside his own skin. He looked tired, not just tonight tired in a way that had been building for a while. "Mom," he said again, softer. "I'm sorry about earlier. That was—" Grant didn't mean it like that. I studied his face, searching for something. Not anger, not guilt, just awareness. I didn't find much. "How did he mean it?" I asked. Mason sighed and looked away, out toward the street. "You know how he is. He jokes. He pushes. It's not personal. It was very specific," I said. My voice surprised even me with how steady it was. Mason rubbed a hand over his mouth. "Paige is upset," he said. "She feels terrible. This night means a lot to her." "Note." "I know," I said. "That's why I haven't said anything." He nodded, relieved, misunderstanding me completely. "Thank you," he said. "Really, we'll talk later, okay? Maybe tomorrow." Later again. Behind him, the terrace doors opened once more. Grant stepped out, his movements more deliberate now. He closed the doors carefully, cutting off the noise from inside, then walked toward us with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, looking between Mason and me. Mason straightened instinctively. "Yeah, just checking on Mom." Grant nodded, then turned his attention fully to me. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice like we were sharing something confidential. "If that joke landed wrong, I apologize. No harm intended." "No harm taken," I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Good," he said, "because there's been some misunderstanding inside, and I'd hate for it to cast a shadow on Paige's night." I waited. Grant shifted his weight. "The coordinator seemed to think you were involved in some administrative thing," he continued, waving a hand dismissively. "Probably mixed you up with someone else. Happens all the time." "Does it?" I asked. He chuckled. "You'd be surprised." The silence stretched. Mason glanced between us, uneasy. Grant cleared his throat. "Anyway," he said, "I'll handle it. These events get complicated when too many people think they're decision makers." I looked at him then, really looked. The confidence, the assumption, the ease with which he claimed control over situations he didn't fully understand. I'd seen men like him before. They weren't villains. They were worse. They were comfortable. "Grant," I said calmly, "do you know why Paige was invited to speak tonight?" He smiled. "Because she's impressive," he said. "Because she represents the future." "That's part of it," I said. "Do you know who funds the expansion she's overseeing?" His smile flickered. "The foundation," he said. "And the foundation answers to whom?" I asked. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not sure what you're getting at." "I didn't think so," I said. Mason stepped closer. "Mom," he said gently, "maybe we should head back inside." "In a minute," I replied. The terrace doors opened again. This time it was the silver-haired man from the bar, the one who had been watching me earlier. He paused when he saw the three of us, then approached with careful politeness. "Excuse me," he said to Grant, then nodded to Mason. I'm sorry to intrude, but I was hoping to speak with. He turned to me. Miss Hale. Grant stiffened. Hale? He repeated. I thought, yes, the man said, cutting him off without raising his voice. Miss Eleanor Hale. Tex. The use of my full name felt like a line being drawn. Grant laughed once, sharp. I think you've made a mistake. The man looked at him steadily. I don't believe I have. He turned back to me. I just wanted to confirm whether the review committee would be receiving your signed recommendation tonight, or if we should hold until morning. Mason stared at me, his face draining of color. Mom? He said, barely audible. I met his eyes. We'll hold until morning, I said. I prefer to be thorough. The man nodded. Of course, he said. Thank you for your time. He turned and left, retreating into the ballroom as quietly as he'd come. Grant stood frozen for a moment, then forced a laugh that sounded brittle even to him. Okay, he said. Someone needs to explain what's going on. I picked up my purse and adjusted the strap on my shoulder. Not tonight, I said. Tonight is about Paige. Mason looked like he was trying to breathe through water. What review? He asked. What recommendation? I placed a hand on his arm, light but firm. We'll talk tomorrow, I said. I promise. Grant opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't know what to say. I turned toward the terrace doors. Before I went inside, I paused and looked back at him. You were right about one thing, I said. This room does have different standards. End quote. Then I walked away, leaving him alone with the realization that whatever story he'd been telling himself about who I was had just started to unravel. The rest of the evening passed in a blur I didn't fully register until much later. I went back into the ballroom, took my seat near the back, and clapped when everyone else clapped. Paige gave her speech. She thanked the donors, the staff, the mentors who had shaped her work. She did not look at me, and I did not fault her for that. She was balancing on a thin wire, and I knew how exhausting it was to keep your footing when everyone expected you to smile while you did it. Grant stayed near the bar, laughing too loudly, drinking too fast. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward me, then away, as if he were trying to decide whether I was real or a mirage created by the wine. Mason barely touched his food. When our eyes met across the room, he looked quickly away, confusion written all over his face. I could tell he wanted answers. I could also tell he wasn't ready to hear them. I left early. I didn't announce it. I didn't hug anyone goodbye. I slipped out the side entrance and walked to my car alone, the night air cool against my skin. The drive home was quiet, the streets mostly empty, traffic lights blinking red and yellow over intersections with no one waiting. I drove slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted the time. I wanted the space between what had just happened and what would happen next. At home, I kicked off my shoes and set my purse on the kitchen counter. I didn't turn on any lights beyond the one over the sink. The house felt exactly as it always did, familiar and steady. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it standing up, staring out the window at my dark backyard. Somewhere, a dog barked once and went quiet. Only then did I let myself sit down. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't replay Grant's voice in my head, though I knew I could if I wanted to. Instead, I did what I've always done when something unsettles me. I went to my study and opened the filing cabinet. Most people think of power as something loud, offices with views, assistants and schedules and doors that close softly behind you. But real power, the kind that changes outcomes, lives in paperwork. It lives in folders labeled with dates and acronyms, in emails archived and forgotten, in signatures that mean more than speeches ever will. I pulled out the slim folder marked CFS 2021 and set it on the desk. Beneath it was another, and another. I hadn't touched them in months. There had been no need. Until now. I sat down, turned on the desk lamp, and started reading. By the time my phone rang, it was nearly midnight. Paige's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," she said, her voice tight. "What was that?" "I'm home," I said. "You sounded wonderful tonight." "That's not what I'm asking," she said. "Who was that man? What were they talking about?" Grant thinks a lot of things," I said gently. There was a pause. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. The question cut deeper than any insult Grant had thrown at me. "No," I said. "I'm not." "Then why did everyone suddenly act like—" She stopped, frustrated. "Like you mattered." I closed my eyes. "Paige," I said. "I've always mattered, just not to them." Silence stretched between us. I could hear her breathing on the other end, quick and shallow. "You embarrassed Grant," she said finally, and the words sounded like they hurt her to say. "I didn't say a word about him," I replied. "He did that himself." "That's not fair," she said weakly. "No," I agreed. "It isn't," she sighed. "Mason's freaking out. He says his brother's convinced you're trying to sabotage something." "I'm not trying," I said. "Mom," she said, warning creeping into her voice. "Please don't do anything. Whatever this is, please. This family, it's complicated." I thought of Grant's smile, of the way he'd said different standards, of the coat in my arms. "I know," I said. "That's why we need to talk. Tomorrow." She hesitated. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat back and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow had arrived whether any of us were ready or not. The next morning, I woke early and made coffee. I moved through my house the same way I always did, feeding the cat, checking the mail, watering the plant by the window that never quite thrived. Ordinary routines have a way of grounding you when everything else feels like it's tilting. By 9, my phone had already filled with messages. Mason, an unknown number I suspected was Grant, a voicemail from Paige asking if we could meet later. I ignored them all and drove downtown. The building I parked in didn't look impressive from the outside. No glass tower. No polished lobby meant to intimidate. Just a concrete structure with a small brass plaque near the door. Inside, the security guard nodded when he saw me and waved me through without checking my ID. On the 5th floor, a woman with a clipboard stood when I entered the conference room. "Miss Hale," she said. "Good morning." "Good morning," I replied. The room was already half full. Men and women sat around the table, some flipping through documents, others murmuring quietly to each other. The silver-haired man from the Gala was there, seated near the end, glasses perched on his nose. He smiled briefly when he saw me, then looked back down at his notes. I took my seat and placed my folder on the table. The meeting started on time. No one mentioned the Gala. No one mentioned Grant. We talked about compliance issues, funding allocations, oversight responsibilities. We talked about the foster placement expansion Paige was overseeing, about the construction partnerships that would be required to house the additional facilities. I listened more than I spoke. I always do. Halfway through, the discussion turned to Whitlock Development. The name hung in the air like a test. "Preliminary findings suggest some irregularities," one of the committee members said carefully. "Incomplete reporting. Delayed disclosures." I opened my folder. "There are more than irregularities," I said calmly. Heads turned, pens paused. I slid a document across the table, then another, then another. Inspection reports, email correspondence, signatures that didn't match dates, permits approved under conditions that had never been met. "These are from the past 3 years," I continued. "They indicate a pattern." The room went quiet, the way rooms do when people realize they've been missing something obvious. The silver-haired man leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "You're certain?" he asked. "I am," I said. "And your recommendation?" another member asked. I didn't hesitate. "Suspend their eligibility pending a full review," I said. "Effective immediately." There was no drama, no raised voices, just nods, notes being taken. A vote. By 10:30, it was done. When I stepped back outside into the sunlight, my phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. "Mom," Mason said, his voice shaking. "What did you do?" "I did my job," I said. "You can't do this," he said. "Grant's company is tied into everything. If they get pulled, they should have thought of that," I said quietly. There was a long silence. Then, "Paige is crying," he said. I closed my eyes. "I know," I said. "And that breaks my heart." "Then stop," he pleaded. "I can't," I said. "And you need to understand why." He didn't respond. The call ended abruptly. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. Not satisfaction, not guilt, responsibility. Grant had believed power was something you claimed out loud. He'd believed he could name me and make it true. He hadn't understood that power doesn't need an audience. As I walked to my car, I knew the real consequences hadn't landed yet. The phone calls would get louder, the accusations sharper. The story they told themselves about me would grow more desperate. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my daughter would have to decide which version of her life she was willing to defend. I didn't go straight home after that. Instead, I drove without much thought until the streets shifted from downtown to older neighborhoods, the kind with narrow roads and trees that lean toward each other like they're sharing secrets. I parked in front of a small brick house with a white porch railing that needed repainting. I hadn't planned on coming here, but my hands knew the turn before my mind did. This was where Paige grew up. Not the house itself, we'd moved twice since, but this street, this part of town. I sat in the car for a while, engine off, listening to the ticking sound it makes when it's cooling down. The quiet felt earned. People like Grant assume confidence comes from winning, from applause, from deals closing, from being the loudest person in the room. They never understand where calm actually comes from. Calm comes from surviving things that don't care whether you're ready. Paige was 7 when her father left. Not dramatically, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet erosion that ended with 2 suitcases by the door and a man who said he needed space, like space was something you could measure and store. He hugged her awkwardly, promised to call, and then became a voice that showed up less and less until it stopped altogether. I remember standing in the kitchen after they drove away, staring at the dent in the refrigerator where Paige's scooter had hit it months earlier. Such a small mark, such a permanent one. I learned then that most damage doesn't look like destruction. It looks like something slightly off that you get used to seeing. I took 2 jobs after that. One during the day, one at night. I didn't tell Paige I was tired. I told her we were a team. I told her we were fine. And for the most part, we were. Kids are resilient when you give them honesty without fear. Or at least that's what I believed. What I didn't tell her was how carefully I started building my life around contingencies. How I learned to read contracts the way some people read novels. How I learned that systems only protect you if you understand them better than the people trying to game them. I wasn't ambitious in the way people expect ambition to look. I wasn't chasing titles or recognition. I was chasing stability, predictability, a way to make sure no one could pull the ground out from under us again. I worked my way into regulatory compliance almost by accident, an entry-level role reviewing reports for a state agency that oversaw child welfare facilities. It was supposed to be temporary, just something with health insurance and decent hours. But I was good at it, not because I loved rules, but because I noticed patterns. What people skipped, what they rushed, what they assumed no one would check. Over time, I moved up, quietly. I didn't bring Paige to office parties. I didn't talk about my work at her school events. When she asked what I did, I said, I make sure places that take care of kids are doing it right. That was enough for her. She didn't need details. She needed consistency, and I needed separation. By the time Paige left for college, I was sitting on more influence than most people realized. Not power you could flash, power you could apply. I sat on review boards, advisory committees, oversight panels that never made headlines but shaped outcomes in ways most people only noticed when something went wrong. I never told Paige any of that. Not because I was hiding, but because I wanted her to build her life without leaning on mine. I wanted her success to be hers. I wanted her to believe the world could meet her fairly if she showed up prepared. That was my mistake. Because the world isn't fair, it's negotiated. And if you don't teach your children that, someone else will teach them something worse. I sat in the car, thinking about the first time Paige brought Mason home. He'd been polite, earnest, clearly nervous. I'd liked him immediately. He talked about his work, his plans, his family with a mixture of pride and caution. He'd mentioned Grant that first night, casually. "My brother's intense," he'd said, smiling. "But he means well." I'd nodded. I'd heard that line before. When Paige told me Grant's company would be handling construction for some of her nonprofit's expansion projects, I'd felt a faint ripple of concern, not suspicion, just awareness. Mixing family and contracts rarely ends cleanly. I'd asked a few careful questions. Paige had brushed them off. "It's all above board," she'd said. "Grant knows everyone." Knows everyone. Another dangerous phrase. I thought about the documents I'd reviewed the night before. The shortcuts, the delayed inspections, the signatures that suggested familiarity where there should have been distance. None of it had seemed urgent until someone handed me a coat and called me the help. Humiliation has a way of clarifying things. It strips away the stories you tell yourself about why you've stayed quiet. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unfamiliar number. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Grant." I didn't respond. Another message came in seconds later. "You're hurting, Paige. Whatever issue you have with me, don't take it out on family." Family. He used the word like a shield. I started the car and drove away from the old neighborhood, back toward my present. As I drove, I realized something that had been sitting just below the surface of my thoughts since the gala. Grant hadn't insulted me because he didn't know who I was. He'd insulted me because he thought he did. Because in his mind, people like me existed to support the structure he stood on, not question it. He hadn't been wrong about one thing. I had been helping, just not in the way he assumed. When I got home, I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter. I checked my email. 3 messages from colleagues acknowledging the morning's decision. 1 from the committee chair confirming the suspension notice had been issued, and 1 from Paige. "Can we meet tonight, just us? Please." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Yes, my place, 7. She arrived exactly on time. Paige has always been punctual when she's nervous. She didn't take off her coat. She stood just inside the doorway, arms folded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I didn't know," she said immediately, "about any of this." "I know," I replied. She shook her head. "Grant says you blindsided him. He says you've been waiting for a reason to do this." "That's not true," I said. "Then why now?" she demanded. "Why tonight? Why at my event?" I gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "Because tonight was the first time he said out loud what he's been acting on for years," I said. "And because I finally understood that staying quiet wasn't protecting you. It was teaching you to tolerate being diminished." Her breath caught. "He didn't mean. He meant exactly what he said," I replied gently, and so did everyone who laughed. She sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "Mason's furious," she said. "He says his brother might lose everything." "Well," I sat across from her. "Grant won't lose everything," I said. "He'll lose access. There's a difference." She looked at me, searching my face. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. The question hurt more than I expected. "I'm your mother," I said. "And I'm someone who understands how systems work. I should have told you that earlier. That part is on me." She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over. "I just wanted my life to be simple," she whispered. I reached for her hand. "Simple isn't the same as safe," I said. We sat there for a long time, neither of us speaking. Outside, the evening settled in. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. Life went on. Grant thought this was about revenge, about ego, about a slight that needed correcting. He was wrong. This was about accountability. and about a truth my daughter was finally being forced to see, that the family she married into wasn't built on strength, but on shortcuts that only worked as long as no one asked questions. And I had spent my life asking questions. After Paige left that night, I didn't clean up right away. Her coffee cup sat on the table where she'd set it down untouched, a thin ring forming at the bottom. I stared at it longer than necessary, the way you look at something ordinary when your mind is busy reorganizing itself. She'd come looking for comfort and left with questions instead. That felt like a failure, even if I knew it was necessary. When the house finally went quiet again, I returned to my study and pulled the folders back out. This time, I didn't read them as a professional. I read them as a mother. The documents weren't dramatic on their own. No single page screamed corruption, no obvious smoking gun. That's how these things usually work. Real damage is buried in routine. It hides in patterns no one bothers to connect because everyone assumes someone else already has. Whitlock Development had been contracted for multiple facilities connected to Paige's nonprofit expansion, renovations, new builds, emergency retrofits. On paper, everything looked acceptable, permits approved, inspections logged, funds allocated and spent. If you skimmed it, you'd see nothing worth flagging. So I stopped skimming. I lined the documents up by date and cross-referenced them with inspection schedules from the state database. I printed out emails and spread them across the desk, following threads backward instead of forward. I made notes in the margins, not of what was there, but of what wasn't. Missing attachments. Reports submitted hours before deadlines with no revisions requested. Inspectors reassigned at the last minute without explanation. Around midnight, I found the first real inconsistency. A safety inspection signed off on a property that, according to the building logs, hadn't even completed its electrical work yet. The date was wrong, or the work was. Either way, someone had lied. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, but focus. This was the part of my brain I trusted most. The part that didn't react. The part that sorted. By 2 a.m, I had a list. Not accusations, questions. Questions that would require answers under oath if pushed far enough. I shut down my computer and went to bed without setting an alarm. The next few days unfolded exactly as I expected. Grant called, then texted, then left voicemails that shifted in tone from irritated to pleading to vaguely threatening. Mason sent long messages trying to explain his brother's side, trying to soften the edges of what was happening. Paige stayed mostly quiet, checking in once a day with short texts that sounded like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I didn't respond to Grant at all. Instead, I scheduled meetings. There's a misconception that consequences arrive like storms, loud, sudden, impossible to ignore. In reality, they arrive like paperwork, incremental, methodical, each step justified on its own, impossible to argue without exposing the thing you're trying to hide. I forwarded my findings to 2 colleagues I trusted, people who had no connection to Paige, to Grant, or to me beyond our shared work. I framed everything carefully, neutrally. I didn't mention the gala. I didn't mention the insult. I didn't mention family. I let the documents speak. The response came faster than I anticipated. Within a week, an independent review was authorized. Notices were sent. Requests for additional documentation went out. Inspectors were reassigned. Nothing public, nothing dramatic. Just enough movement to make the ground under Whitlock Development begin to feel unstable. Grant noticed. He showed up at my house on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced. I saw his car through the front window before he rang the bell. I didn't rush to answer. I finished rinsing my coffee mug, set it in the rack, and wiped my hands on a towel. When I opened the door, he was already smiling, that same practiced expression he wore in rooms full of donors. Up close, I could see the strain behind it. "Eleanor," he said, like we were old friends. "We need to talk." "Before it, I don't have anything to say to you," I replied. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, this has gone far enough." "I disagree," I said. He leaned one hand against the doorframe, lowering his voice. "You're putting my company under a microscope. Do you have any idea what that does to people? To families?" I looked at him steadily. "I do." He sighed, frustration creeping in. "If this is about that joke, it's not." I cut in. He frowned. "Then what is it about?" "Compliance," I said simply. His jaw tightened. "Everything we've done is legal." "Then you'll be fine," I said. For a moment, something cold flashed across his face. "You're enjoying this," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting it." He straightened, the friendliness evaporating. "You think you're untouchable," he said. "You think your position protects you." I almost smiled. "I don't need protection," I said. "I need accuracy. It's like—" He stared at me for a long second, then laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're going to regret this," he said. "Probably," I said, "but not for the reason you think." He left without another word. That night, I received a call from one of the inspectors reassigned to the Whitlock Review. She didn't say much, just enough. "There's more here," she said. "A lot more." I closed my eyes. "Document everything," I said. "I am," she replied. The next piece fell into place 3 days later. An email came in from a junior administrator in the permitting office, someone I barely knew. The subject line was vague. Question regarding prior approvals. I opened it and felt my breath catch. Attached were internal messages I hadn't seen before. Conversations between Grant and a former deputy in the permitting office. Friendly, familiar, too familiar. They referenced expedited approvals, favors returned, inspections handled. It wasn't bribery, not in the way people imagine it. It was influence, the kind that grows quietly between people who assume they'll never be challenged. The deputy had retired the year before. The paper trail had gone cold. Until now. I forwarded the email to the review committee with a single line. "This may be relevant." The response came back within minutes. "This changes things." By the end of the month, the review had expanded into a formal investigation. Grant's company was notified that several projects were suspended pending further findings. Contracts were frozen, payments delayed. Paige called me that night, her voice shaking. "Mason says Grant's panicking," she said. "He says they might lose everything." "They won't," I said, "but they will lose control." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you know this would happen?" she asked. I thought about the night of the gala, the laughter, the coat in my arms. "I knew it was possible," I said. She exhaled slowly. "I don't recognize them anymore." I hesitated, then said the truth. "You're starting to." The investigation moved faster after that. Not because of me, but because once scrutiny begins, people start protecting themselves. Former partners distanced themselves. Contractors spoke up. Records surfaced that had been buried under years of assumed trust. Grant stopped calling. Mason sent one last message asking me to reconsider. I didn't reply. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a new batch of documents, something caught my eye. A line item, a subcontractor name that didn't match the work performed. I cross-checked it, then checked it again. The name belonged to a shell company, and that shell company traced back to an address I recognized immediately. Grant's home office. I sat back in my chair and let the realization settle. This wasn't just negligence. It wasn't just shortcuts. It was deception. And for the first time since the gala, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not satisfaction. Resolve. Because whatever story Grant had been telling himself about who he was, and how untouchable his world might be, was about to collide with a truth he could no longer laugh off. The message came late on a Sunday evening, the kind of time people choose when they don't want to be overheard by the rest of their lives. It wasn't from Grant. It wasn't from Mason or Paige. It was from a number I didn't recognize, a short text that said only, "This is Lily Whitlock. I need to talk to you. Please." I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Lily was Grant's wife, Paige's sister-in-law by marriage. We'd met exactly 3 times, all in group settings where she'd smiled politely and said very little. She had always struck me as careful, the kind of person who measured rooms before stepping into them. If she was reaching out now, it wasn't impulsive. I replied with my address and a time for the next afternoon. She responded immediately with a simple thank you. She arrived early. I noticed that first, because punctuality tells you a lot about someone's state of mind. She parked down the street instead of in my driveway and walked up slowly, as if giving herself time to reconsider. When I opened the door, she looked relieved and afraid all at once. "Thank you for seeing me," she said quietly. "Come in," I replied. She took a seat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. She didn't remove her coat. Her eyes kept drifting toward the window, then back to me. "I'm not here to defend Grant," she said immediately. "I want you to know that. I'm man." I nodded. "Then tell me why you're here," she swallowed. "Because this is bigger than what happened at the gala, and because you deserve to know what you're dealing with." I waited. Lily took a breath. "Grant hasn't been honest," she said. "Not with me. Not with Mason. Probably not with anyone." "That's not surprising," I said. She winced. "It should have been," she said. "I just didn't want to see it." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "He's been using shell entities for years," she continued. "At first, he said it was just to streamline things, accounting tricks. Everyone does it," he said. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice even. "And now? And now I know it wasn't just that," she said. "It was a way to move money around without questions, to hide overruns, to funnel payments when projects went sideways." I thought of the subcontractor name I'd flagged, the address, Grant's home office. "How do you know this?" I asked. "Because I signed some of the paperwork," she said, shame flickering across her face. "Not knowingly. He asked me to help organize things when his assistant quit. I didn't understand what I was looking at. I trusted him." "Until you didn't," I said. She nodded. "Until inspectors started calling. Until accounts were frozen. Until he started panicking and asking me to shred documents." The word shred landed hard in the quiet room. "I refused," she said quickly. "That's why I'm here." I studied her. She looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something alone for too long. "Why now?" I asked. "Because he's going to blame you," she said. "He already is. He keeps saying you orchestrated this, that you're doing it to punish him." "And you don't believe that?" I asked. She met my eyes. "I believe you did your job," she said. "And I believe Grant's been gambling with other people's lives for a long time." She reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive, holding it like it weighed more than it should. "Everything I could access is on here," she said. "Emails, draft contracts, payment logs." I made copies before he noticed. I didn't take it right away. "You know what this means," I said. "Yes," she replied. "It means my marriage is over. It probably means he'll say I betrayed him." "Did you?" I asked. She shook her head. "I stopped lying for him," she said. "There's a difference." I took the flash drive and set it on the table between us. "You should speak to a lawyer," I said. "I have," she said quietly. "They told me cooperating was the only way forward." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what she'd handed me settling in. "There's something else," she said. I looked up. "He's been leaning on Mason," she continued, "pressuring him to cover gaps, to move money. Mason didn't know what he was doing, but Grant made it sound harmless, temporary." My stomach dropped. "How much?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted, "but enough that Mason's scared." I closed my eyes briefly. Paige, always Paige. "I didn't want to hurt her," Lily said, tears welling. "But I couldn't keep quiet anymore." I believed her. After she left, I locked the door and sat at my desk for a long time without turning on the lamp. The flash drive lay in front of me, like a final piece sliding into place. This was the insider moment, the point where truth stops being theoretical and starts being provable. I copied the files carefully, verifying each one. The scope was worse than I'd anticipated. Falsified invoices, circular payments, emails that assumed no one outside Grant's inner circle would ever read them. By the time I finished, the sun was coming up. I forwarded everything to the investigative team with a note that was shorter than it deserved to be. Additional materials from an internal source. The response came quickly. This confirms criminal exposure. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, feeling something close to grief, not for Grant, for the family illusion that had just collapsed completely. Paige called that afternoon. "Mason hasn't come home," she said. "Grant says he's dealing with lawyers." "Ack." I chose my words carefully. "Paige," I said, "you need to protect yourself right now." There was a pause. "From what?" she asked. "From being asked to clean up messes that aren't yours," I replied. She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know who to trust," she said finally. I thought of Lily, standing in my living room with shaking hands and a flash drive full of truth. "Trust the people willing to lose something to tell you the truth," I said. 2 days later, the investigation went public. Grant Whitlock's name appeared in a headline he couldn't charm his way out of. Charges were pending. Projects were halted. The story wasn't kind, and it wasn't quick. Mason showed up at my door that night, eyes red, shoulders slumped. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear." "I believe you," I said. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "Everything's falling apart," he whispered. I looked at him and felt the familiar pull to fix things, to step in and absorb the damage. I resisted it. "This is the part where you decide who you are," I said. He looked up at me, something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Grant had thought the danger was me. He'd been wrong. The danger was the truth finally reaching the people who'd been protected from it for far too long. Once the story broke, time started moving differently. Hours felt compressed, days stretched thin. The investigation that had crept forward on careful feet now stood upright and announced itself. Offices released statements. Lawyers issued denials carefully worded enough to say nothing at all. Grant's name appeared on screens next to phrases like ongoing inquiry and alleged misconduct. And the Whitlock family learned, very quickly, what it meant to lose control of a narrative. I stayed out of the spotlight. That wasn't a strategy so much as a habit. I didn't give interviews. I didn't correct rumors. I went to work, reviewed files, attended meetings that had become suddenly urgent. Institutions have a way of snapping into focus when reputations are on the line. Within days, subpoenas were issued. Inspectors returned to sites they'd signed off on months earlier. Construction crews were told to stand down. Funding streams froze. The nonprofit Paige worked for released a statement assuring the public they were cooperating fully and that no children had been placed in unsafe conditions. That part mattered to me more than anything else. If one child had been harmed, I would have carried that weight for the rest of my life. Paige called me late one night, her voice flat with exhaustion. "They pulled Grant from all projects," she said. "Everything's under review. The board put me on leave." I closed my eyes. "Paid leave?" I asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "They said it's procedural, but it feels like punishment." "It isn't," I said. "It's protection." She was quiet. "Mason moved out," she said finally. I let that settle before responding. "Where is he?" I asked. "With a friend," she said. "He says he needs time to think." "That's reasonable," I replied. She laughed once, short and bitter. "Nothing about this feels reasonable." "No," I agreed. "It feels necessary. If you..." In the weeks that followed, I watched consequences unfold the way I'd always known they would. Not explosively, gradually. Grant was questioned. Then questioned again. Lily was granted immunity in exchange for cooperation. The shell company was exposed. The paper trail told a story Grant could never spin his way out of. He tried, of course. He released a statement, blaming overzealous regulators. He framed himself as a victim of bureaucratic overreach. He hinted at personal vendettas without naming names. It didn't work. Once facts are laid out plainly, charm loses its grip. Mason came to see me one afternoon, quieter than I'd ever seen him. He sat at my kitchen table and stared at his hands. "I feel stupid," he said. "You trusted your brother," I replied. "That's not stupidity." "It feels like it," he said. I defended him. I told Paige she was overreacting. I poured him a glass of water and set it in front of him. "What matters is what you do now," I said. He nodded slowly. "I told the investigators everything I knew," he said. "I didn't hide anything." "That matters," I said. He looked up at me. "Grant says you ruined him." I met his eyes. "Grant ruined himself," I said. I just stopped looking away. That was the truth, stripped of emotion. The nonprofit board cleared Paige after their review. She returned to work under a different director, her role narrowed but intact. She came over one evening and sat on my porch with a mug of tea, staring out at the dark. "I don't know who I am without that family," she said. "You're the same person you were before them," I replied. "You just don't have to pretend anymore." She nodded, but the loss was still fresh. Ending a marriage, even a broken one, carries its own kind of grief. Grant was arrested on a Tuesday morning. The charges were financial, not violent. But the photo that ran with the article showed a man who had finally realized he couldn't talk his way out of this one. His expression was stunned, almost offended, as if consequences were something meant for other people. Lily filed for divorce the same day. When the sentencing came months later, I didn't attend. I read the summary online like everyone else. Prison time, restitution, a permanent ban from holding certain licenses. His company dissolved quietly, assets liquidated to pay debts he'd never intended to settle. Paige called me afterward. "It's over," she said. "It's done," I corrected. There was a difference. Life didn't snap back into place after that. It rarely does. But it did settle into something truer. Paige found a smaller apartment closer to her work. She stopped hosting fundraisers at hotels and started meeting donors in coffee shops. She seemed lighter, even when she was tired. Mason moved out of state for a while. We spoke occasionally. He was learning, slowly, what accountability looked like without someone else managing it for him. As for me, I returned to my quiet routines: morning coffee, paperwork, meetings. The work didn't change, only the context did. Sometimes I thought about the gala, about the way the room had laughed, about the coat in my arms. It felt like another life now, a snapshot of a version of myself I no longer needed to inhabit. Grant had believed this was personal. He'd believed I was acting out of wounded pride. He'd never understood that the system he took for granted was the same one that would eventually hold him still. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits, it observes, and when it moves, it does so with a kind of quiet certainty that no amount of laughter can undo. By the time everything was finished, the story people told about me had changed completely. Some called me ruthless, others called me brave. Most didn't call me anything at all. I was fine with that, because the only opinion that mattered was my daughter's. And the night she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Thank you for not letting me become like them," I knew the cost of silence had finally been paid. The rest was just aftermath. The confrontation I'd been expecting didn't come from Grant. It came from Paige. She arrived at my house on a Saturday morning without calling first, her car pulling into the driveway with a kind of purpose that told me this wasn't a visit for coffee. She stood on the porch for a moment before knocking, like she was bracing herself, and when I opened the door, she didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside, set her keys down, and exhaled sharply. "I'm angry," she said. "I know," I replied. She turned to face me, arms crossed, eyes bright and focused. "I need you to hear me before you explain anything." I nodded. "Go ahead." She paced once across the living room, then stopped. "Everyone keeps telling me I should be grateful," she said. "Grateful that you protected me. Grateful that you exposed Grant. grateful that I didn't go down with him. And you're not? I asked. I don't know what I am, she said. I feel like my life was pulled out from under me without my consent. I sat down in the chair across from her. That's fair. She looked at me sharply. Is it? Yes, I said. Because I didn't ask you before I acted. She frowned. Why not? Because if I had, I said carefully, you would have asked me to stop. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked away. Maybe, she admitted. I couldn't let your safety depend on whether you were ready to see the truth. I continued. That wouldn't have been fair to you either. She dropped onto the couch, suddenly tired. You always do this, she said quietly. Do what? I asked. Decide, she said. You decide what's best and move forward, and everyone else has to catch up. I took that in. That's something I learned a long time ago, I said, when no one else was deciding for us. She stared at the floor. I needed to believe I chose my life, she said, that my marriage was my decision, that my work mattered on its own. It did, I said. It still does. She shook her head. I don't know if I believe that. I leaned forward. Paige, I said, nothing about Grant created your worth. It only tested it. She looked up at me then, something raw in her eyes. I wanted you to like them, she said. I wanted you to belong. I felt the words land in my chest. I belonged before them, I said. And so did you. She wiped at her eyes angrily. Then why didn't you tell me who you were? She asked. Why did I have to find out like this? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the years I'd spent keeping my world separate, convincing myself it was generosity when it was really control. Because I didn't want you to lean on me, I said finally, and because I didn't want you to resent me. She laughed, hollow. Too late for that. I know, I said. That's on me. We sat in silence for a while. The house creaked softly around us, settling in the midday heat. Outside, a lawnmower droned somewhere down the street. I don't want to be rescued anymore, she said at last. I don't want to rescue you, I replied. I want to stand beside you. She nodded slowly. Then you have to let me fail, she said. Yes, I said. And you have to let me stop fixing. She looked at me for a long moment, then reached out and took my hand. This is harder than I thought, she said. It usually is, I replied. That afternoon, Mason called. Paige answered, listened for a minute, then handed the phone to me without a word. I need to say this once, he said, his voice strained. And then I'm done. Okay, I said. I was wrong, he said. About Grant, about you, about everything. I let my loyalty blind me. Yes, I said. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued, but I needed you to know that I see it now. That matters, I replied. There was a pause. Paige deserves better than what I gave her, he said. Yes, I agreed again. When the call ended, Paige let out a breath she'd been holding. I don't know what happens next, she said. You don't have to, I replied. You just have to decide what you won't accept anymore. She nodded. That night, after she left, I sat alone and thought about the word family, how easily it gets used as a shield, how rarely it's treated like a responsibility. Grant had believed family meant protection without accountability. Mason had believed it meant loyalty without question. Paige had believed it meant belonging at any cost. I'd believed it meant carrying everything quietly so no one else had to. We were all wrong. Family, I realized, isn't about who you save. It's about who you stop enabling. And for the first time since the gala, I felt something like peace, not because everything was resolved, but because nothing important was being ignored anymore. The final piece fell into place when I least expected it, and not in the way anyone had predicted. It wasn't another charge against Grant. It wasn't a surprise witness or a hidden account surfacing at the last minute. That part of the story had already played out exactly as it should have. What came next didn't belong to the courts. It belonged to something quieter and more permanent. It came in the form of a letter, plain envelope. No letterhead, delivered on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sorting mail at the kitchen counter. The return address belonged to the Accreditation Council that certified nonprofit placement programs nationwide. I recognized it immediately, not because I dealt with them often, but because I respected them. They didn't waste words. I opened it, standing up. The letter was formal, careful, almost apologetic. It acknowledged the investigation into Whitlock development and outlined the findings that had already been made public. Then it shifted, gently but unmistakably, to Page's nonprofit. Because several of the facilities tied to her expansion had been approved using Whitlock documentation, the council was required to conduct its own review, not of the buildings, of the program's eligibility. I sat down. The language was precise. No accusations, no assumptions, just procedure. Until the review was complete, Page's program would lose its certification. Temporarily, they said. Pending reassessment. Temporarily has a way of becoming permanent when the damage is reputational. I read the letter twice, then a third time, looking for something I might have missed. A loophole, an exception. There wasn't one. Page called that evening before I had a chance to tell her. She'd received her own notice. "They're shutting us down," she said, disbelief threading through her voice. "Not forever. But everything stops. Placements, funding, all of it." I closed my eyes. "I know," I said. There was a long pause. "You knew?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I got the letter this afternoon." Her voice sharpened. "And you didn't call me?" "I needed to think," I said. She laughed once, brittle. "Of course you did." "I'm not going to fight this," I continued. "What?" she said. "Mom, this isn't fair." End quote. "No," I agreed. "But it's correct." Silence stretched between us, thick and stunned. "They didn't do anything wrong," she said. "We didn't do anything wrong." "You didn't," I said. "But the system doesn't measure intent. It measures process." "So what?" she demanded. "We're collateral damage?" "For now," I said. She exhaled sharply. "Grant did this," she said. "Even now, he's still hurting us." "Yes," I replied. "And this is why shortcuts matter." Her voice wavered. "This is my life's work." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm stepping away." That got her attention. "From what?" she asked. "From everything connected to this," I said. "Effective immediately." She was silent. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "I can't oversee or advise any program you're connected to. Not now. Not ever." "Mom," she said slowly, "this isn't your fault." "It doesn't matter," I replied. "It's my responsibility. It's fine." And she started to cry then, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion more than grief. "I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for me," she said. "I'm not," I said. "I'm modeling what accountability actually looks like." The next morning, I submitted my resignation from 3 advisory boards. Not because anyone asked me to, because it was the only ethical move left. The calls started immediately, colleagues trying to talk me out of it, friends insisting I was being too harsh on myself. Even one board chair suggesting I could quietly stay on in an unofficial capacity. I declined all of it. Paige came over that afternoon, pale and hollow-eyed. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at the letter I'd placed in front of her. "They took everything," she said. "They took the platform," I corrected, "not the mission." She looked up at me. "You really think we can rebuild?" "I know you can," I said, "but not the way you were doing it before." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means smaller," I said. "Slower, independent. No prestige partners, no family connections, no borrowed credibility." She swallowed. "That sounds impossible." "It's not," I said. "It's just honest." She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "All this time," she said quietly, "I thought the danger was Grant." "So did I admitted. She turned her head toward me. "But it wasn't," she said. "No," I said. The danger was believing proximity to power was the same as integrity. The news spread quickly through the nonprofit world. Page's program lost donors who didn't want to wait out the review. Others reached out quietly, offering support without conditions. The noise thinned, leaving only what was real. Grant tried to use this as leverage from his holding cell, sending word through Mason that I'd gone too far, that I'd destroyed Page's future as thoroughly as his own. Mason relayed the message once. I didn't respond. 2 months later, the accreditation review concluded. Page's program was reinstated, provisionally, under a different structure. New board, new reporting. No construction partners tied to the past. Page accepted the terms without complaint. On the day the letter arrived confirming it, she came over again. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She sat down across from me and said, I was wrong about what success looked like. I nodded. Most people are. She took a breath. I thought having the right name attached to my work would protect it. And now? I asked. Now I know it made it fragile, she said. That was the final twist, the one no one saw coming. Not Grant, not Mason, not even Page, at first. The collapse wasn't his empire. That was just debris. The real collapse was the belief that power borrowed from the wrong place could ever hold, and in losing everything that looked impressive, my daughter found something that would actually last. As for me, I settled into a smaller life. Fewer meetings, fewer titles, more mornings spent on my porch with coffee and silence. I didn't miss the influence. I didn't miss the access. What I kept was my clarity. Grant had called me the help because he thought my value came from proximity to people like him. He never imagined that the most devastating consequence would be the one he couldn't undo the moment everyone involved had to choose integrity over advantage. That choice cost all of us something, and it gave us back everything that mattered. 6 months passed before life began to feel like something I recognized again. Not the life I'd had before the gala, and not the one that followed immediately after, when everything felt like it was held together with temporary solutions and deep breaths. This was something quieter, less impressive on the outside, more honest. Paige moved into a small apartment near the edge of town, the kind of place with thin walls and a balcony that caught the afternoon sun. She stopped dressing for meetings the way she used to, stopped performing competence for people who equated polish with value. When she talked about her work now, she talked about kids by name, not numbers. She talked about families who showed up late but stayed. It was slower, harder, real. She and Mason separated formally. No lawyers, no dramatic scenes. Just two people acknowledging that the version of themselves that had married didn't exist anymore. Mason called me once afterward, not to ask for help, but to say thank you for believing him when he told the truth, for not rescuing him from the consequences of trusting the wrong person. I'm learning how to live without shortcuts, he said. So is everyone, I replied. Grant's sentencing faded from public attention quickly. Another headline replaced it. Another story. That's how it always works. People move on once the spectacle ends. The damage, though, stayed where it belonged, with him. He wrote me one letter from prison, a rambling explanation that tried to reframe everything as misunderstanding and bad luck. He never apologized. He never mentioned the gala. He never once used my name. I didn't respond. Lily sent a short message instead. She'd taken a job in another state, something far removed from construction or nonprofits or influence. I sleep better, she wrote. That felt like apology enough. As for me, I stayed out of public life entirely. No boards, no committees, no advisory roles. I consulted quietly when asked, behind the scenes, under conditions that made my boundaries clear. I no longer corrected people when they underestimated me. I let it happen. It had lost its sting. Some mornings, I'd sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and watch the neighborhood wake up. Kids heading to school, parents rushing, dogs being dragged along sidewalks by owners who hadn't finished their first cup yet. Ordinary life has a way of reminding you what actually matters. Paige came over one evening carrying a stack of papers and sat at my kitchen table, spreading them out carefully. "This is the new program outline," she said. "No shortcuts, no big partners. Just work." I scanned it, nodded. "It's solid," I said. She smiled, small but genuine. "I don't need you to sign off on it," she added. "I know," I said. That was the victory. Not control, not vindication, independence. The gala felt like a lifetime ago. Sometimes I replayed it in my mind, not with anger, but with curiosity. The way people had laughed, the ease with which a room decided who I was allowed to be. It was unsettling to realize how fragile respect can be when it's based on assumption. But I didn't dwell there. Dwelling keeps you tied to versions of yourself you've already outgrown. Paige asked me once if I regretted anything. I thought about it before answering. "I regret not teaching you sooner that silence can be mistaken for consent," I said. She nodded. "I won't make that mistake again. That was enough." The world didn't change because of what happened to us. Systems kept grinding along. Power found new faces. But something fundamental shifted in our small corner of it. We stopped confusing access with worth. We stopped mistaking protection for love. Grant had believed humiliation was harmless if delivered with a smile. He'd believed calling someone the help placed them beneath him permanently. He'd never considered that the people who do the quiet work are often the ones who understand how everything actually functions. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned off early, replaced by something steadier. Clarity has a way of doing that. On a warm evening in late spring, Paige and I sat on her balcony watching the sky darken. She handed me a glass of iced tea and said, "I'm glad you didn't save me." "It's one." I looked at her, surprised. "You don't need saving," I said. She smiled. "I know." And in that moment, I understood that the real aftermath of everything we'd endured wasn't loss or triumph. It was alignment. Between who we were and how we lived, the rest was just noise fading into distance. I didn't tell this story because I wanted to be admired. I told it because for a long time, I misunderstood what strength actually looked like. And I know I'm not the only one. For years, I believed that staying quiet was kindness, that absorbing discomfort was maturity, that keeping the peace was proof of love. I thought if I didn't correct people, didn't challenge assumptions, didn't insist on being seen accurately, I was being generous. What I was really doing was teaching the people around me what they could get away with. That night at the gala didn't create the collapse. It revealed it. Grant didn't suddenly become entitled when he stepped up to that microphone. He'd been practicing that entitlement for years, refining it in rooms where no one pushed back. The laughter didn't happen because people were cruel. It happened because people were comfortable enough to accept a story without questioning who wrote it. I was part of that comfort. My silence made it easier. I used to think power was something you either had or didn't have, something visible and declared. I know better now. Power is the ability to walk away from systems that benefit you when they harm others. Power is refusing to clean up messes you didn't make, even when doing so would keep you liked. Power is letting consequences land where they belong. The hardest lesson for me wasn't learning how to confront someone like Grant. It was learning how to stop shielding the people I loved from reality. Loving my daughter didn't mean smoothing her path at any cost. It meant trusting her to survive disappointment, disillusionment, and loss without being rescued from them. I didn't save her. I stood still while the truth did its work. That distinction matters. For a long time, I confused enabling with loyalty. I thought protecting family meant absorbing the fallout of their choices. What I learned is that doing that doesn't preserve relationships. It corrodes them. It teaches people that accountability is optional, as long as someone else is willing to carry the weight. Family isn't who you protect from consequences. It's who you refuse to lie for. The aftermath of everything we went through wasn't glamorous. There was no moment where everything snapped into place and life felt victorious. It was quieter than that, smaller. We lost access. We lost prestige. We lost invitations to rooms that had once felt important. What we gained was alignment. My daughter learned that her work didn't need powerful names attached to it to matter. She learned that integrity attracts a different kind of support, slower but steadier. She learned that belonging purchased through silence is always temporary. I learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're load-bearing structures. Without them, everything eventually caves in. If there's one thing I wish I had understood sooner, it's this. When someone diminishes you publicly and expects your politeness to protect them, they're counting on your fear of disruption. They're betting that you'd rather be comfortable than correct. You don't owe anyone that kind of comfort. You don't owe anyone your silence. If someone calls you the help, literally or metaphorically, they're revealing how they see the world and where they think you belong in it. You're allowed to let that moment be the end of something instead of the beginning of self-doubt. Walking away doesn't mean you lost. Sometimes it means you refuse to participate in a lie. I didn't raise my voice that night. I didn't correct Grant in front of everyone. I didn't demand an apology or make a scene. I let the truth move at its own pace, because truth doesn't need drama to be effective. It only needs daylight. And when daylight finally reached everything that had been hidden, the collapse wasn't violent. It was inevitable. That's what people misunderstand about consequences. They aren't acts of revenge. They're the natural result of systems being asked to function as intended. I don't regret the life I lost. I regret the time I spent believing that staying small made me safe. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in it, if you've ever swallowed an insult to keep the peace, minimized your worth to make others comfortable, or mistaken endurance for love, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not cruel for enforcing boundaries. You are not selfish for refusing to carry what isn't yours. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop explaining yourself and let reality catch up. I didn't walk out of that gala with a victory. I walked out with clarity, and clarity, it turns out, is enough. Everything else is just noise fading behind you as you finally move forward.